in revision, I would probably have to ask myself, like, do we need to mention all of these? I don't know though. Maybe it's okay for your reader to be confused. So I wasn't going to film a video today. I'm still sick, as you can hear, but last night my friend Danica finished leaving beta reader notes on Act 1 of my young adult fantasy manuscript. So yeah, I finished writing this Project Moon. I finished writing it a year, I think I finished writing it around June-ish. I was very deliberate about what kind of feedback that I wanted. So after every like 4-ish chapters, I left questions, like specific questions that I wanted answered, whether it was about characters or world building and stuff like that. So it was mostly for me to get a sense of like, how well could I do exposition? How well could I do pacing and all that kind of stuff? So a lot of the feedback that she left me is very specific and very tailored to the exact things that I asked her. She really went through the entire first act, which is like, I think 20,000 words, and she left her thoughts, and I did peek at some of the comments like as she was making them, but I haven't really gone through everything, and I haven't fully looked at everything and internalized it and all that kind of stuff. So I thought today I would actually film it and go through the comments together, just like talk through my thoughts on it and to see if anything's gonna surprise me. As far as Act 1 goes, I felt like I was very tunnel visioned with like the whole drafting process for this act. Like I actually wrote it twice in the first act, and I restructured it quite a few times while I was writing Act 1 because I was really struggling with pacing. And keep in mind, this is the first fantasy manuscript that I finished, like start to finish. Even though it was only a year ago, I was still trying to find my footing with this book. So now that I've had like a year-ish away from the manuscript, I feel like I know what's wrong with it. I feel like I know myself better as a writer, and I feel like I can look at Project Moon with, you know, the rose-tinted glasses off. I don't know how much like constructive or negative feedback Danica has left me. I know that whatever she's gonna say is gonna be very kind, but I hope that she does have some constructive stuff in here. I hope she didn't hold back. I think it's important to be able to kind of harden yourself a little bit. There are times, especially when you're in the middle of drafting, where you might not be ready to accept all of the feedback, even if it's what you need to hear, you know? So much time away from this book, I am ready to just like rip it open a little bit. I don't think anything Danica's gonna say is gonna surprise me, but we shall see. I know I've already like talked so much about Project Moon before, but there's 4 narrators, 4 main characters. Every chapter alternates their perspective. So after the first 4 chapters, I left 3 questions for Danica to answer. So the first question was, what were your first impressions of Kyra, Tion, Mito, and Aston? So those are the 4 characters. Personality, internal struggle, physical appearance, etc. They all... Okay, so before we look at what Danica said, I do think that personality-wise, I don't know how much distinctive personality you get from these characters. Okay, so she said, Kyra, she seems like the type that would mess you up, but also very sad and lonely inside. Yeah, that's true. I mean, as far as the first 4 chapters goes, that's really all I really wanted a reader to be able to glean from her. She said, personality-wise, I'm getting Vi from Arcane vibes. Okay, that's that's interesting. Started world building for this book 3 years ago, so Arcane hadn't come out yet, but I think it's interesting that she mentions Vi specifically as like the character that Kyra reminds her of, because Vi is actually my favorite character from Arcane, and I really enjoy that character archetype. I think like most of the projects that I've worked on have had that kind of female character. Because I really enjoy it. Like I really enjoy writing the emotionally stunted very powerful female character that has that is very capable but has a lot of emotional baggage to work through. It's interesting because Project Night, which is the book that I'm writing right now, my main female character actually, I wouldn't say falls into that mold for the first time in forever, I think. But I do miss writing it. I really do miss writing just like a mean female character. As for looks, I have a terrible habit of not actually picturing the story in my mind when I read. Honestly, same. I don't do a lot of like visualization in my head myself when I read stories. When you're a writer, you have to describe things, but when I'm reading, I also definitely glean over a lot of physical descriptions. One thing I struggle with quite a bit is definitely physical appearance, at least not immediately. Like you might not get a physical description of a character until like chapter 6 or something like that. So that is one thing that I have tried to work on since writing Project Moon, is like being a lot more deliberate about describing characters and finding more interesting ways to describe characters besides like this is their hair color and shit like that. First impressions, she seems like a cool character, and because like they said, she's volatile, I feel like she's gonna go off track and create chaos for Tion's plan. But I like that it's unpredictable. Yeah, so Kyra is kind of supposed to be the chaos element in the quartet. What's interesting is, or I guess what the challenge is it doesn't necessarily come from the fact that you don't know what she's going to do. It kind of has to come from the fact that you do know what she's going to do and you know what the other characters want to do, and they fundamentally clash because you are in Kyra's head in the same way that you're in, you know, Tion's head and all the other characters' heads. Kyra's motivations can't really be left in the dark because you follow her perspective. I don't know how well I pulled it off, to be honest. So Tion, she said, Tion reminds me of Zuko, LOL, but with less early season anger. Okay, that's really funny. You know what? I feel like that's accurate. Like whether or not I realized I was writing a less angry Zuko or not, I think I did. You can tell that I was much younger when I was writing this book and when I was writing the archetypes of this book, because there's nothing wrong with writing a Zuko-esque character, but I think the fact that Danica pointed it out so obviously shows how much I was kind of leaning into that archetype without knowing. Zuko's character has become just like such a gold standard for being pulled in different directions because of duty or redemption arcs, revenge arcs, you know. He's such a well-crafted character that in and of itself, Zuko has become like an archetype. He wants to please his father and hopes to be a good prince, but still needs to prove himself. Honestly, appearance-wise, I can kind of see him looking like Mako from Legend of Korra. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's not inaccurate. I think in my head, I also pictured someone looking Mako-esque, maybe not as old as Mako, probably a much like younger, softer looking face, but pretty much the same. Okay, Mito, let's see what she said about Mito. I think Mito is probably my favorite character so far. Okay, that's interesting. Mito is also, especially in these early chapters, like Mito was my favorite perspective to write. You can probably tell. I think it's so blatantly obvious that I was playing favorites with this character. His chapters were just longer, he just had like better dialogue. I had a lot of fun with Mito. The thing about him is that if you look at the 4 characters, like he's the one that's the most distinctive. Outwardly, he's not as serious as the rest of them, because unlike the rest of the characters, in the beginning he really is just like, he's really just there for a good time, you know? Kyra, Tion, Aston, they all have like things that they need to do, like roles they need to fulfill, you know? But Mito's kind of just tagging along in the beginning. He is supposed to be the character that can kind of like bring in, you know, some levity into the story when it needs it, and also for the more serious characters to kind of like bounce off of him. One thing that I did try to do though was that I didn't want Kyra, Tion, and Aston to all feel really, really stoic, because you can't have like an entire cast of stoic characters. So even though the other 3 are serious, I'm hoping that they don't all come across as the same shade of serious. Because I would say Kyra is like serious and mean, Tion is like serious and uptight, and then Aston is like serious and quiet, you know? How well I was able to portray that, I don't really know. So dynamic and reminds me of Jaskier from The Witcher, or even Jesper from Shadow and Bone. Yeah, I would definitely say he probably has like Jesper vibes. Jaskier is a fun parallel, I think. I love Jaskier's character. I definitely wasn't thinking of Jaskier when I was writing Mito, but I guess it does kind of fall into the same archetype. Okay, so she did point out that you can tell, while he's more humorous, you can tell there's something deeper with his past / homeland. This is true. I'm glad that she mentioned that because I really struggled with Mito. Even though Mito was one of the more fun characters to write in the beginning, I do think that internal conflict-wise, he's the weakest. And in this first act, I was very I was almost pantsing a lot of the scenes that kind of hint towards whatever his internal conflict is. I didn't find it incredibly compelling. So what I mean by that is, I don't know how to describe it. Like, there was just something about his character that's just like very lackluster. In writing, you have the promise, progress, payoff type thing, right? And you do this for your characters. You see how those promises are going to progress, and then the payoff is going to see whether they are able to get what they want or not get what they want, and how does that resonate with their character, whether or not they get the thing that they want, you know? And then that's the character payoff. And where Mito falls flat, and I would say Aston as well. Kyra and Tian are a little bit more figured out, but Mito and Aston, where they fall flat. In the beginning, I think I was able to like set up the ideas of the quote unquote promises that I wanted to make about their character. So for Mito, it's the fact that he is struggling with something deeper with his homeland. And so that's the promise that you make with the reader at the beginning of the story, is you want to see how Mito's relationship with his homeland is going to progress. In the progression, I think I didn't really figure out the most effective scenes to make that progression like super compelling or interesting. And so you get the payoff, but it doesn't hit as impactfully as it could. Okay, let's go to Aston. Aston is the big teddy bear bodyguard we would all love to have in life. Loyal, big softy at heart. He's got a less fortunate past as a child. He struggles with whatever incident happened when he left Bassett's crew. As for appearance, I am imagining Garen from League of Legends. Okay, I'm unfamiliar with Garen. Aston, there's really like nothing more besides that you really need to get from Aston. He is kind of the stoic bodyguard. So I also asked her like how clear it was about like what Kyra's circumstances are at the start of this story. I actually don't know why I asked her this, because I don't think you're supposed to know why she's imprisoned until later on in the act. So that's kind of my fault for asking her that. She does mention that it is hard to keep track of the names of the nations, which is good to note, because I think in fantasy there's always a bit of a learning curve, but that was something that I had in the back of my mind, was that there are so many nations and cultures in this book, and for better or worse, they can be probably really confusing to keep track of. In revision, I would probably have to ask myself, like, do we need to mention all of these? I don't know though. Maybe it's okay for your reader to be confused. So in one of the chapters, Tian is explaining the magic system to his younger siblings. And she did point out that it was a good use of dialogue to explain lore. I was nervous about that scene because it's always like difficult to try and hide exposition in certain places in your book, especially in Act 1. But I'm glad that she pointed that out. So one thing she pointed out that she liked was there's an exchange that happens between Kyra and Aston in chapter 8. There's a line here about how Kyra's haughtiness grated on his nerves. So this is Aston, in Aston's point of view, and he is having a conversation with Kyra and he's kind of like annoyed by her. And she does point out that she likes this detail that shows that he's annoyed, and it shows more sides of him and that he cares about Tian. So I actually really struggled with this chapter, and specifically this interaction between Kyra and Aston, because I know that I wanted them to talk. I wanted them to have like a moment where they kind of butt heads specifically about Tian's character, because Aston, as his personal guard, is very loyal to him, very devoted to him, whereas Kyra has a completely different relationship with Tian. It's very negative. I wanted Aston to make it clear that he was kind of like finds her kind of like off-putting, and I wasn't really sure how to kind of slide it in there subtly, though. I wasn't even sure if it would like come through, his annoyance would come through, but I'm glad it was like, it comes across that way. She also left a comment about great choices so far on what lines you choose to end the chapter on. That also means a lot to me because I do try to treat chapters as contained stories, you know, because that's kind of what chapters are, right? I like to have chapters like start and end on whether it's like a thematic note or a resonant moment. So I did try to put a lot of care into that. She had some moments of confusion in some of the lore dumpy chapters. There's a conversation, for example, that Kyra is having with Tion's father in chapter, what is this, 9? So there's a lot of lore and exposition that gets tossed in this chapter. It's a chapter that gave me so many headaches. It really is good to know like what people find confusing, because there are moments that I spend like so much time trying to craft exposition because I think it's going to be so confusing, but then it ends up not being confusing, but then there's like another line your beta reader points out that you didn't even think would be confusing but is, you know. Chapters 5 to 9, I asked her a bunch of questions about the magic system, the world building. In chapter 9, you also learn basically what Kyra did while she was in the Empire, like why she got in trouble, and you kind of get a little bit more insight into her hostile relationship with the crown. So I was just kind of asking Danica some questions about like the clarity of all of those things. I think there are some aspects of the world building that aren't entirely clear, and in revision I would definitely have to like fix that. The main thing that I cared about though was, is it clear now what happened in Kyra's past that has led to all of the events right now? And she did point out all of the main points that I wanted to be clear. So I'm happy about that, because I think that was one of the things that was like giving me the most headaches, was slowly showing all of the details that would hint at what really happened while she was there. I also, after every section, I asked, is there anything you liked from this section, anything you didn't? So just like a general catch-all, if there's like any additional details that she wanted to leave. Okay, so for things that she liked, she said amazing world building and characters so far. Love the explanation of lore through dialogue as well as the small details throughout. I think this section fleshed out the characters a little more and we see more of their personality and quirks. Okay, so I'm happy about that. I can't complain about that. Let's see what she says for anything she didn't like. So far, I think the only thing is that I think you can avoid adverbs, as sometimes it ends up repeating the description you wrote within the same line. This is something that I've definitely tried to like cut out a lot since writing Project Moon, but it does definitely slip in there all the time. Okay, then she also said, this one is just a suggestion. I also think there are some opportunities where you can mix up exposition, as I notice it's often told through flashbacks and passing thoughts. This is an interesting piece of feedback. I'm very grateful for the suggestion. I'm such a sucker for an anecdote. And I also love a good flashback, just like a mini flashback, you know? I don't know if I can stop myself from doing flashbacks, just because I feel like the structure of this story is that so much stuff happened prior to the events of this book. Some of the drama in like pivotal moments of the story happen because of certain things that have happened in the past. I think it's a good thing that she noted that there's a liberal use of flashbacks, not just flashbacks, but like anecdotes as well. Just because that's my whole thing about like exposition, is I just tend to hide things inside of anecdotes and flashbacks. But you know, it's valid. It's valid. It's definitely something I can be conscious of. Okay, so we're basically at the end of the act. So chapters 10 to 13, I just was asking her more questions about world building and a lot of like really specific questions about like the different nuances of the different nations, because in the Empire there are all of these nations and all of them kind of like have a different thing going on. Their social status and all that kind of stuff. So there were some details that I was just asking her for clarity on. Based on her responses, I do think I need to work on some of it a little bit. Okay, so the last question that I asked her at the end of this act was, did you feel the ending of the act effectively raised the stakes in an intriguing way? What did or didn't work? So let's see what she said. I think the ending for this chapter definitely raised the stakes, because up until now, she goes on to say what the narrative has established. But now there's a mysterious third party. She does say, I was shook. Okay. Okay, so she said, I think the only thing I might suggest, and it's only a suggestion because I don't know if it would be a right or wrong move, would be to actually introduce the stakes earlier to help pacing. Okay, and then she goes on to elaborate what sorts of things are established and what kinds of things would be more useful for the reader to know sooner, so that when we get this reveal or whatever that happens at the end, it would like heighten the impact of the drama. This was one thing that I definitely felt like was lacking, and I struggled a lot with the pacing in Act 1 of this book. Like I said, it was, I mean, I think you can even watch vlogs where I said like, oh, I'm restructuring Act 1 and shit like that, because in the beginning, like my first draft of this act, the pacing was so slow. And I think one thing that I really struggled with this book in general was how to establish stakes when it comes to building a plot. And when it comes to building stakes, it really is about managing readers' expectations so that you can shatter them at the right moments, you know? Definitely I can see where the stakes would have been really muddled, but I'm glad that you pointed it out, and it is a good suggestion, is just like clarifying the details of why certain things are really important, and when that thing gets taken away, what does that actually mean for the world, or like, you know, the wider society. So yeah, there are just a lot of abstractions in some of the world building here that I think is definitely holding back some of the drama. So I agree with her points. And then lastly, I just asked her the same question that I asked after every section: what did you like and what did you not like? And her final comment, I know it's only the end of Act 1, but I'm so amazed with your world building. Oh my gosh, Danica, she's too nice. She's literally too nice to me. Can't even imagine the efforts it takes to make a story like this. And you did a great job fleshing out the character's world and magic system. As someone who cannot write dialogue for shit, I am also in love with how you write conversations. They feel really natural, especially the fun banter. Danica, you're too nice. She's too nice to me. I do think there are some opportunities where you can change up exposition or cut words / adverbs that tell instead of show. Also, if I misunderstand something in the lore, it could honestly just be because I'm dumb and have the memory of an absolute goldfish. You know what though? I still think that if you can write exposition memorably enough, even someone with like a shorter attention span should be able to like glean at least the most important details, you know? I mean, that's it. That's the end of all of her major comments. I am so grateful for her for reading 20,000 words of this absolute nonsense. Yeah, always good to get another writer's opinion on the story. This was super helpful. It's interesting because last night I was actually skimming this doc that I sent her because I haven't reread Project Moon in a really long time. It's crazy how much your writing can like change in a year or even less than a year. Just comparing this and like even just the raw prose, comparing it to Project Night, my current book, is so interesting because already I've seen how much, like, even just the little things that I've changed about my writing habits. Like the adverbs is one thing. Like Danica pointed out, there's like liberal use of adverbs. There are probably some on the nose descriptions, but yeah, I was just like skimming it, and there's a lot of like certain things that certain phrases that I would use a lot as like crutch words and stuff like that. Even just like some of the stilted phrasing. Very fascinating to see how much your writing can improve in as little as a year. To be fair, I will say that Project Moon tonally is very different than Project Night. So there could be some of that as well. The prose in Project Moon, this book, I was probably intentionally trying to write it a bit more like tersely, and it's also young adult, and so I think my approach was a little bit different because of those things. Even putting all of that aside, I think opening Project Moon again and like looking at a piece of this draft again has really made me realize as well how much I've learned how to just like intuitively, almost, I can't explain it, just the, you know, that intuition you get as a writer about like what details are and aren't actively contributing to the core story or the core character arcs or the themes. I see so many instances in this draft where I was just like throwing details in that aren't really doing anything. They aren't really enriching the story beyond aesthetic. Anyways, that is all for this video. Thank you again to Danica for very kindly offering her suggestions on this draft. And yeah, that is all. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.